So today, just a brief overview of Inspec. What is Inspec? It's an open source framework based on RSpec, which has been around for a little while, which we use in testing and auditing your applications and your infrastructure. And that means you're not doing the configuration of a system, but you're actually checking its state. What is the state of a series of on-prem servers, some in the cloud, edge devices, even Docker containers and container hosts. It detects violations and displays that information in the form of a report, both in the CLI, and if you're using Automate, you can see those reports over time, and they can be readily exported and shared across teams. And if you're thinking in DevSecOps terms, that's a very important capability. And it provides a consistent domain-specific language that's platform agnostic. So whether you're running Linux servers or multiple flavors of Linux servers, or you're running Windows and multiple flavors of Windows, even Mac, and some cloud-based forms, even a wide variety of different systems, you can use the same methodology to scan and check those things. And you can check for packages, files, users, cloud resources. In fact, there are over, it's close to 500 Inspec resources that are built into the tool that enable you to scan things. And about half of those are for scanning cloud platforms like AWS and Azure and Google Compute. So I'm just going to move my camera out of my face. So what's it used for? Again, infrastructure tests, which are, business apps, and what are those things that you want installed on particular servers, regardless of where they are. Those tests are actually shipped as part of your cookbooks. And you can use them in Test Kitchen, and I'll have a little bit of Test Kitchen to show off here in the demo in a few minutes. Security tests, these of course are the things that are sort of beyond just the application. If you're deploying Nginx, for example, you want certain content there, you want certain things turned on, certain things turned off, ports, things like that. But what about in security, SSL, firewall rules more broadly, other things that are under the covers that are part of sort of baselines? A lot of that falls into the security context. Again, these ship with cookbooks and can be added. Compliance tests, regulatory and industry standards that are, not a mild thing for people to think about in healthcare industry, the banking industry, higher education. They have very specific and strict regulations that they have to follow, and the compliance testing makes that possible. And out of the box, right within Automate, we have more than 500 CIS and STIG-based profiles that are pre-built with hundreds of controls that test for these kinds of capabilities and vulnerabilities. So the benefits, you can collaborate. The Inspec language, and you can see a little example here. It's really human readable code, and it can be shared across all your DevOps teams for easy understanding. And it scales really well. As I mentioned, we support all these different platforms. Well, you can create profiles that have clauses in them that say, if it's this type of Linux platform, do this. If it's this kind of Windows platform, do that. You don't have to have isolated, separate profiles. You can bring them all together, which helps reduce the sprawl. And you're shifting left. You're able to test everything. Developers can test within their workstation environment before deploying code to test or dev environments. You can test throughout that process. And that leads to continuous visibility, speeding the process, and dramatically lowering the cost, both in human time and dollars, for continuous compliance. The Inspec language here, again, is a smaller control. You're using resources that are built into the tool, and matchers. And matchers are things like, in this example, it should be installed or should not be installed. Content might equal something. You can use regular expressions. Because you're working in Ruby, you have all the power of Ruby, and it's a real language. Contrast that a little bit with YAML, which doesn't give you the logic, it gives you the descriptors and things like that. But Ruby enables you to do a whole bunch of other things without really having to understand Ruby itself in the way it's presented in the Chef Inspec language. Key features, really easy to deploy Chef Inspec. Nowadays, the key tool for developers is Chef Workstation, which is a free download from chef.io. It comes pre-configured with not only all the tools you need, Chef, Inspec, it also has Knife, it has Cook Style, and it has embedded applications so that you don't need to worry about, gee, do I have the right Ruby on my system? It doesn't matter. Chef Workstation takes care of that. It's technology agnostic too, so when you're scanning using your workstation, it doesn't matter what you're trying to scan. There's no agent required on any of the devices that you want to scan. And you can move forward very quickly in really scoping out what the state of your environment is like. There are hundreds of resources, as I mentioned. There are built-in templates. There's a lot of content that's available for free out both in the Chef Supermarket and in different repos, and you can actually trigger those directly, and I'll show you an example of that. I think that's one of the coolest things that you can do with Inspec. And it's fully integrated with Chef Automate, which is our graphical dashboard, which then can do things like report to ServiceNow when there are failures or inconsistencies and things that you don't want. So now I'm going to switch over to the demo mode. So if you'll bear with me a second while I switch my screen. Okay. So this doesn't look very exciting straight off the bat. I just want, this is, I want to underscore the environment that I'm working in. And I have Chef Workstation installed on a Linux machine, and that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the terminal. And I'll jump back and forth a little bit between the terminal here and VS Code, which is my preferred editor when working with Chef. Just so you know, Chef produces a plugin for VS Code that it makes it really easy for auto completion and a wide range of things. And I strongly encourage you to use that. So on this machine, I have Chef Workstation installed. I just want to like to show, you know, I'm running the current version. All this comes with Workstation when you install it, and it's regularly updated. And you can see it also includes the client, which will come in handy because it'll actually deliver capabilities based on some of that. And Inspec.
John, I just, sorry to interrupt, but actually the screen is not clear for us. So can you just try to reshare it again?
Yeah, can you maybe restart? We're just seeing a black screen with a white line in the middle.
Oh, that's weird. Let me try again.
We'll call this the zebra demo.
Is that better?
Yes, there we go.
Okay. So again, you can see I just did a Chef V on this workstation, and this is the Inspec version that I'm using right here. For this example too, I set up a raw Ubuntu 20 node. It's just a tiny VM. I haven't done anything to it. I just started it up. It has some root credentials so I can access it, but I haven't done anything to it. And one of the cool things about Inspec, since I have SSH capability to get from this machine to that node, I can use SSH. We also have the capability for you to use WinRM for a Windows server. So a lot of what you see me do here in sort of the Linux world, you can replicate in the Windows world with slightly modified commands. So I have that machine, and I'm just going to ping it so you know it's alive over there, and there it is. And there's nothing currently on it, as I said. Now, I'm going to go through and create a couple of specific profiles. But before I do that, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to scan that node with a Linux baseline. And this baseline is publicly available, and there's a couple ways to do it. I don't have to install this thing on my system at all. I'm just gonna get the right window. I'm gonna do it from the supermarket itself, which is this devsec. Oops, might help if I could type Linux baseline, and I'm targeting this machine with the credentials, and I don't even need to point to the key because I preset that up. And here it's just telling me, hey, you might want to try this other way of doing it, and it will. What it did is it's going out and just grabbed that profile, pulled it back, scanned that machine, and you can see there's 27 successful controls, 30 failures, 2 were skipped, and 100 successful. Now that's pretty powerful right out of the box, and I could point that to any machine that I have credentials for. I could also, because these things are essentially in GitHub, I can use GitHub, and I'm just going to do this, github.com. This is the same Linux baseline, and I'm targeting the same machine. This is really powerful because you can take advantage of those existing resources and set certain standards, but you can also build in some customizations to these and put in waivers and everything else. This also comes up in a prettier colored version. But again, you can see 106 successful, 63 failures. Not bad for a raw node, but kind of worrying if you want a system to be part of, a compliant framework that you have going on. So I'm going to, now that you've seen some of the basics of some more complex profiles, I'm going to show you a simple Nginx configuration and security profile that I put together. Here I am in VS Code. And when we talk about Inspec profiles, we talk about controls, and you'll see a control here and a control here. This one's called Nginx Config. This one's called Nginx Security. These are things that I just made up that were important and meaningful to me. There are many more sophisticated ways to name things, but what you see is the impact. This is my team's reasoning on how important is this thing, with 1.0 being the highest and obviously 0 being the lowest. Excuse me. Each of these has a title and a description, but you can also add tags, which enable filtering, which is particularly valuable if you're using Automate, where you can sort of narrow your particular problems down, and different teams can search for different kinds of stuff. In this case, I'm going to be deploying Nginx using secure HTTPS, so I want 80 not to be listening, 443 to be listening. I want Nginx to be installed itself, and I actually am going to do a little command. This basically runs curl to check the content of my website. Very simple and straightforward. On the Nginx security side, there was a problem exposed years ago called Poodle with some of the old forms of SSL, and I want to make sure that in this case, TLS 1.1 is enabled, and actually I really want 1.2, but this is a good example. Now I can go back to my command line, and I'm going to run this, even though I haven't done anything, this profile against the node. Now I expect there to be failures because I haven't yet configured this node, and sure enough, there it is. Port 80 is not listening because there are no web servers on this box, but 443 and the other content that I'm checking is not in place. So none of this is surprising. But you can see right off the bat that you could use Inspec to test machines like, gee, have I configured that one yet? Nope, I haven't done that. So in order to configure this machine, I'm actually going to create a recipe, and this is new functionality based on the Chef Client 7.5, where I have my recipe, and I'll show you that in a second, but I can include this profile that I just wrote and showed you, and I can add waivers right here too. And waivers are those things that say, hey, you know, flag these controls in my profile as I don't want to run them for whatever reason. And I'll show you a little bit of that as well. I won't be doing a specific example of waivers, but in a nutshell, that's what it will be doing. The actual recipe that I have here, and it's just this Inspec demo, and I'm installing the package. I'm creating some directories for SSL and the certs, because we're going to be running on port 443. I'm adding the default configuration file, an index, and here I'm also using templates, which are, in this case, you know, actually pulling some values from the node that will be reported and populated into this, which is handy, again, for debugging. I'll have Chef start and enable the service, and I'll have it reload if there's any change to the cert in this case. Now, ordinarily in a production environment, I would go through and I would push this recipe, this cookbook with its profile up to my infra server, and then see and automate those things. But for now, since I'm in this example, I'm not using automate or infra server at all. I'm just going to do a chef run, which is an ad hoc way of running a particular recipe and applying it to a node. So in this case, it's Ubuntu 5, and I have it that resolves. And I'm going to use the nomenclature for chef, the chef language. I could also do it like recipes and default like that, but to keep things consistent, you do it like this. I'm going to run this. Oops. I need 2 colons in there. And you can see what's happening here in real time. It's downloading and installing the Chef client on this particular machine. And it's when it's done with that, it will grab the recipes, and specifically that default file, which is also the, and here it's doing it right now, and the profile and that web server recipe itself. This process, and you can say, hey, it worked. And because I'm doing this in an ad hoc way, I'm not getting any reporting coming out of here. But now that it's been configured, I'm going to go back to my same compliance scan that I ran before that had the red in it. And this time I should get a different response. And in fact, I do. So I've never had to manually log into this node at all. I've been able to configure it, turn off things, enable everything that I want, and everything is working. Of course, you know, the final test is to go into the website itself. And because I'm running 443, I get a, you know, a very common alert there, and you can see that it's up and running. And because I had that dynamic content fed right into the HTML page, it shows it here as well. So obviously that's very powerful. But another way, before you even push something to some code repository for your rest of your team to start working with it, you can use Test Kitchen, and Inspec integrates very nicely with Test Kitchen. And in this case, what it'll do is it will spin up a sample machine, and I've identified that here as the Ubuntu 2004, but I could have multiple platforms listed in here. It's going to, in this case, use the plugin for AWS, which means when I run Test Kitchen, it's going to spin this stuff up in the cloud, run the tests there, and then tear them down. for me automatically. I could also use VirtualBox locally, any other sort of local system like that, like I forget what it's called on Windows. It just came out of my head. But I also very regularly use the Dockin plugin, which uses Docker. So it actually creates and spins up this stuff in Docker containers that replicate very closely what you would see in an actual VM or system. Down here, you can see the run list is included, which looks a lot like that recipe, the command that I just did in Inspec. And all I have to do in this case is run kitchen test, which will run 4 different commands. It'll first build the systems, then it will converge. Something happened. So I guess there was a hiccup there in contacting AWS. So it's spinning up a node in AWS. It's then going to install the Chef client on that node, run the content, and then go through the process of running inspect scans based on that. And then it will, if it's successful, shut itself down and destroy those things in the cloud. I can also do those steps individually, which is something that's great about the test kitchen process, particularly when you're using Inspec, because you can make changes and reconverge your content as you're going along. And then retest with Inspec, really get a solid test-driven development workflow for yourself and see in real time, hey, it works, it doesn't work, I still have some work to do, everything else is as I want it, so that when you're moving your code, whether it's profiles alone or profiles with cookbooks, you can really be confident that what you expect to be happening is happening. And you can see here, it's doing everything, just configured the system. There's the compliance report there in green. There it confirmed it. And since it's confirmed, it's going to tear it down and finish that process. I'm just going to stop the share here. Oops. Go back to sharing our PowerPoint. So that concludes the demo. Heather, I don't know if you want to come back on and take some questions.
Sure, sounds good. So just to remind everyone, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A or the chat, and we're going to go ahead and start taking those. I am seeing a couple questions already. One question is, how much, Ruby do you have to know to kind of use Inspec profiles?
Great question. When I came to Chef almost a year ago, I didn't know any Ruby. I would consider myself being still very Ruby illiterate. Now I've worked in other programming languages. I understand, logics of, if thens and things like that. But I consider myself a non-Ruby expert, and I'm able to do quite a bit of functionality, like the things you just saw, very quickly. So I don't even think of it as writing Ruby. I think of it as writing my Chef code because I'm using this thing. But there are times when I want logic because I've created profiles and I've created cookbooks that I want to use for both Linux and Windows. So I've put the logic in that if the platform is Windows, do this. If the platform is Linux and Debian, do this. And I'm able to pull that off very quickly. So if you're not a Ruby expert, no need to fear, particularly if you use the plugin for VS Code. It includes, excuse me, nice auto completions and things like that. One other thing that ships with Chef Workstation is Cookstyle, which uses robocops to actually check and correct your code. So you can do a Cookstyle in the folder where you've created your profiles and cookbooks, and CookStyle will identify them and repair them for you. So there's a lot you can do without knowing any Ruby.
Cool. We've got another question here. Can I easily run Inspec against certain CIS controls? Any documentation about this from a chef as a tutorial?
As for the tutorial, I not off the top of my head, but within Supermarket, if you search for profiles, that's where I got the baseline that I showed you. And in the docs.chef.io, I think it's /inspec, you'll see examples of using GitHub repos directly, like I did. And these are, there's a devsec repo that enables you to just use those freely without downloading them. Of course, you can do you can clone those repos, and then you can make edits and do things like that to those. But check out the Inspec docs website, and also within the tool itself, Inspec-H, which is the help. There are actual examples right in there, and it's pretty extensive for the online help that you'll have access to there.
And if you're an Automate user, are there profiles in Automate then?
Yeah, so and I think I might be able to share this. Let me move back to my screen, and if you don't mind me sharing.
We love when you share, John.
Let's see. So here I am in the Chef Automate dashboard, and I'm on the compliance tab. Under the profiles, you can see there's 511. There's none for me because I haven't uploaded any here. But these 511, and you can see here CIS, Amazon Linux, everything else, and this is searchable. So if I wanted to do, stay with my Ubuntu, if I could type baseline, in this case, say I want this Ubuntu Linux 2004 server benchmark. This is available to those users who have subscriptions to either Inspec or Chef Infra. Automate comes as part of that, and this premium content gets part of that. And you notice that these get and download buttons, if I click get, it'll just add it to this profile, and I can start running scans and reference it from my workstation. And here you can see this particular profile has 204 controls, and you'll recognize in here, this looks similar in construct to the simple one I created. And you can see the control has this long name, which is tied to a specific CIS security benchmark. It's got description. It's got some logic in here, and it's got to describe one, for example, like if one of these two things is true, do one of them, but not both, don't require both. As a non-Ruby expert, it would take me a long time to get to the level just to create this one CIS control. And that gives you an example of the built-in stuff. Now, everything I create locally or my team creates, we can push that to Automate, and it then becomes accessible and usable across the board for any system that I'm managing.
Awesome. So it looks like we're a little past the event time. So if anyone has additional questions, please feel free to reach out to John or myself on the Chef Slack community. You'll find us both there. And I want to thank you all for joining us, and hope everybody has a great day or night. And hopefully we'll see you back out on one of our next webinars to learn more exciting best practices with Infra.